hit that.
Yes. Oh. Check to see if their audio is working. It might take 30 seconds to
Yeah.
a minute for it to update on. the
Oh, I'm
stream.
seeing. Hey, yay. Okay, cool. So I'm gonna go now to my. Wait. Thank you for being here. This is not my forte, and my husband was like, "Here's what you do."
Okay. Great. So. you can hear it.
Awesome.
That's what I was mainly concerned about. Okay, will there be audio?
Awesome. I was very worried about this. I'm very glad you're here.
She asked us to do that. She was like, does anyone know how to like live stream anything? And I'm like, I used to stream stuff, so.
My husband was like, Twitch is a lot easier. I don't know if I want to Twitch mine. I don't know, maybe that would have been easier. Hello.
Hi. All in control of you.
Yeah, he was very helpful and we're all set up, I think, so.
You look wonderful, honey.
It's good to
I
see
give
you.
I'm proud of you. Really good.
Yeah, glad to be here. Finally.
Yeah. Oh, good. So you're Zooming it as well.
I'm streaming it on YouTube.
And then is that,
This is the webcam that's capturing. So
Okay.
they'll be able to see the presentation and a small video of me. up
okay,
front.
okay, great,
So,
great.
and I didn't give the link to you. I don't know if anybody in the studio wants to watch, but
And
I think it will be recorded at least temporarily,
it will.
and then I can send
Okay.
it to you for them to look at.
Yeah, I didn't want to bother you with like things, our needs.
Yeah.
So let's see here. Are you monitoring this or are you in a good place that?
I think it's
Indonesia?
just
Yeah,
set. No,
we
we're
checked
good.
the audio.
Yeah.
You can hear it from the
Okay.
other side.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
yeah.
So you
As long
don't,
as they have the YouTube live link.
so do you feel the need to stay or you want?
What? I mean, it's okay. I think
It'll be very interesting.
that, yeah, that's what I was planning to say.
Okay, so what we'll do is, we usually, because you're set up already, we'll probably confer outside before,
Okay.
like, we'll tell you that, and we'll come back in and I'll introduce you as if it's more formal, so that you're,
Okay.
so where will the camera be that,
So
like
they'll.
to see?
Do you want to like stand up
Yeah.
here? So I guess if you're just in somewhere in front of the
In the-
screen.
okay,
then
that's
it'll be
great.
fine. Just kind of like in your eyes a little bit, but
Just so you have that for your future,
yeah.
and that it's a little more formal. Would you mind moving over
Yeah.
there?
So I brought my oboe. Do you think it's important to demonstrate it that way? I'm worried it's just going to be distracting to fuss with reeds.
No, I don't think you need to.
Okay, so I'm just not going to worry about
You're
it.
welcome to, but I'm not sure you need to.
Okay.
I would feel distracted if I were you.
I feel very distracted at the thought of trying to perform
Yeah.
and
No, I don't think,
present.
I don't think I've ever heard anyone play.
Okay, great.
And then I have something for you in my car.
Oh,
I meant to get it, so maybe I have that.
drive is beautiful.
Oh, good, what a beautiful kind of vacation. Year. Who are the people who listen, like,
I know my family members are listening, and I have
Okay, good.
another oboe friend listening. I invited Kristen to listen, but she's teaching 14 middle schoolers a master class all day today, so.
Okay. That lets me know I'll welcome them and
Oh, okay.
reintroduce myself, probably
Okay.
just so that you can have that for your,
Yeah, that'd be great.
your future.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello, how are you?
Good. Nice to see you in person.
Good to see you too.
Thank you for your work.
Oh, I mean, it was, I didn't do much.
Yeah,
Yeah, really.
it was great things.
Yeah. I'm gonna sit up next to the outlet over here, I think, second floor, yeah.
How have you done?
Good. Well, I was sabbatical this semester, so things have
Oh,
been,
you are?
yeah.
Oh, well, thank you doubly for coming.
Oh, yeah, of course. This is the enjoyable part of the job, you know.
Yes, yes, I thought since she's streaming this into her future, I'd be a little more formal, I'll go up and introduce myself.
Sure.
Maybe just to,
Yeah.
so she does that.
Yeah, of course. Do you have paperwork on that?
Hey.
I do.
You do, okay.
How are you?
Good, I'm so looking forward to this. Hi, Alex. How are you?
So this is Alex Alani, if you've heard that, Alex is a junior, he's an education student, he was helping her set up, and
Oh,
he's
great.
here both for enjoyment and just to make sure everything is.
I'm Kyle.
And he loves music theory also.
Yeah, we were
Good.
talking.
You've come to the right place.
Who doesn't?
Who doesn't? Well, I could name some names.
How long do you have? Yeah.
You will in an hour.
You'll love it even more. Sorry.
I didn't know this.
I forgot.
I'm so used to being, so it's telling a little bit, because she's recording it, I'll be a little bit more and introduce us.
Is that the camera there?
On the tripod is the mic, and
Okay.
just my webcam is.
Okay.
So you're streaming as well as recording? Cool.
Yeah, my family's gonna watch.
I was
so-
gonna ask, do you have distant relatives?
Well, just my parents and sisters and my mother-in-law, and then another oboe friends.
Are they still in Alaska?
No, they are in Nebraska now, a different SCA.
Yeah. Different Scott.
Yeah.
A little closer.
Yeah, much closer. It's a very easy day drive.
Yeah.
so-
From Illinois, yeah, we've driven from
Yeah,
Bloomington
from here to,
to
yeah.
Lincoln, it's like 8 hours or something, right?
Yeah, yeah, they're Nebraska, or they're Omaha, so they're
Oh, so
even
it's
closer.
even easier.
Yeah.
Oh, great.
Yep.
Much, much closer.
Yeah, it's very nice. I think they like being sort of in the middle of all of their children instead of
Right.
very far away.
Did they have the choice?
Kinda. So my dad works for the government. He's civilian, but he has kind of posts sort of like an army position would have. So he can apply to different places. It just depends on, when his bill is up and what's open, so.
I think the first online doctoral defense we did was Lindsay. She invited like her teacher from undergrad was there. It was really nice. Like, oh, look at all these people who are here. Her mom and dad were there from
And she's on Zoom.
West Virginia. Yeah.
It's a full pay.
Yeah, that's
It was
cool.
a full group. It's like, oh, look at I was right there. I thought, oh, 356 is that right? If I push it, will it really sound an alarm?
Yeah.
Probably so. So I walk out.
Every like, end of every August, I get freshmen coming around by my office and saying, how do I get to the second or third floor of the library? I'm like, well, you could, it's actually right there. But that's not how you're gonna get there. You're gonna go all the way down, around to the labyrinth.
I think our most recent thing that was just like, oh, she's new, of course. We were in recital hall having ensemble auditions, and a student just walked in and said, hi, I'm looking for, like Dr. So-and-so, and we're like,
Wrong
this is
building?
recital hall? But then, of course, because I'm the mean cop, she's the super nice cop, she went, what class is it? She said, class piano. She's like, oh, it's right across the hall. It was right there, but she was obviously just went this way, but she should have gone that way. I thought, oh, you can make that mistake. Like, well, there is a piano in this room. I mean, there are 2 or 3 of them up there. Is this where I take that class? It was the second day of classes. Over time, have worked out a good cop kind of thing that happens. I'm the mean one, for sure. I'm like, can you not read the signs that say auditions in progress, do not enter? She's like, is there any way that we can offer you help? And this girl, man, too nice, too nice.
Where's your office now?
225, so I used to be on the 3rd floor, and I'm in the chair's office. The fancy one is on the 2nd floor. So I'm basically looking at the Mac from my office window, so it's right across that alleyway.
Oh, so it's at the end of the.
Yeah, it's at the
Okay,
other end.
yeah, that's what I was thinking, okay. Are all your colleagues in that at this point?
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay.
We were offered the chance to move to the new building back in 2013, but nobody wanted to do it, and I was the only one that thought, oh, cool, new building, new office, grand piano. But then they pointed out I'd still have to come all the way over here to make photocopies or use the library or see any of my colleagues or anything, so I stayed. So I still think of the East Studio building as the new building, even though it's 10 years old at this point.
Is
I'd
that
still say the same.
Oh my, yeah.
2013, I think.
Yeah.
We're close.
Yeah.
Significantly newer.
I was
Right.
just thinking that it was more than 10 years ago when I started. But I have a 6-year-old now, so.
When
Wow.
did you finish your classes?
I finished classes in 2017.
Yeah.
And Molly was born in 2016. So I just had 1 semester of classes after that.
Getting everyone mixed up.
Oh, it's
But I wasn't
somewhere.
in studio then. I
Yeah.
just was taking theory.
You're a student in theory.
I was a student in
Nice,
theory. Yeah.
nice.
What's your tax account?
Sure, because we should start.
I just got an email from her a few minutes ago that was
Oh,
asking, no, it was asking people to serve on the former certificate hearing committee.
I wonder if you should do it, should I follow up on the chair, or do you want to just, it's up to you. You
If
just
one of you
wanna-
can text her, that's probably the easiest way to go.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't want to be that really personal.
Because I have to get back to Indianapolis for tonight's concert. So we should not start too late. Plus, all the Nebraskans are online. Right.
Well, they're all in Utah now. Because my brother just had a baby yesterday.
So how many grandkids are there? Here she is now.
Hooray!
Perfect timing.
I went to the
That's what I did.
library.
That's what I did. Like, oh, it's
sorry.
this, it's
How are
this
you?
room.
Good, how are you?
Good.
Oh, you're right on time.
Good.
Perfect.
Yeah, that's great. So, usually we would confer the committees, she has her things set up, and wonder if we would best go outside
Yeah,
and let her.
outside and- Natasha's using all that technology that is treating us. So,
Okay.
look outside, a little.
So we're gonna give you more exercise, no, no, that's okay.
I did the exact same thing. I was like right there.
Just you and me.
for those who are listening, I don't see me.
Yeah, you won't see yourself, sorry. But you're there.
Or an audience. We just want to welcome you to Natasha's final event of her degree, and it's really exciting to have you here for that, and you worked really hard. We look forward to hearing, your presentation. And the doctoral degree, for those who are listening, are Dr. Kyle Adams, Professor of Music Theory, Roger Rowe, Professor of Oboe, and Kathleen McLean, Professor of Bassoon. And we've all enjoyed your work. So we're going to let you present, and we'll have maybe some questions, and then we'll confer again. And that'll be the end of our event. Okay?
Great.
Great.
Thank you. So, since I started studying music as a young teenager, I was obsessed with those moments in my lessons with my private teachers and in rehearsals with band and orchestra directors, where my mentor would take the notes that we had learned and would make just slight adjustments to how we played them, and the phrase would just come alive. And that transformation was, and the feeling that you get when you feel and you hear that transformation was something that I've been chasing, all the way through my music career. That's why I study music, because it's just so moving to me to hear just notes on a page come alive. And I thought for a long time that a lot of this was just mean to spend a lot of time in music and you'll just develop really good instincts. And I think part of that is true. I think for a lot of people that is sort of what happens. You start recognizing musical patterns and responding to them, and you learn what works and what doesn't, and what makes a good phrase and what makes a less ideal phrase. But I think there's more to it than that, and as I studied more music theory in my undergraduate and more in my graduate school work, I came to realize the intimate relationship between phrasing and good performance and the music theory that was happening behind the music. And this sort of really came in focus for me when I read a book that was assigned to me by David McGill, Sound in Motion. He said, "Depth of expression is not a talent. The real talent that leads to musical expression is intelligence. The development of expression is the development of the intellect." And this really struck me because it meant that, the more I studied the music theory, what was going on, between the notes, beneath the notes, that deeper level of analysis, that would give me the power to understand what was happening in the phrase, and then I would have choices. I would be able to make informed choices about the way that I would perform. So, when I had to write a final project, a final document for my doctoral degree, I knew it had to be something related to this. And my intentions from the beginning were pretty selfish ones. I just wanted to write the thing that I needed to write to understand this better. So that's what this was initially. I wanted to develop the theory skills that I needed to be able to take a piece of music and tear it apart and put it back together again in a way that made sense. And I wanted to come up with and kind of experiment with methods that would allow me to do that with a student as well. I wanted to, bring music theory into my warm-up, into my practice room, into performance, and into my teaching. And I think that what I wrote is going to be useful as well. So this is not just for me. This can be for our entire community of oboists. So I want to talk a little bit about how I went about building my project. So the first thing that I did, obviously I took theory in my undergraduate, and I took theory all through my graduate work as well. But I learned about these two textbooks in my music theory pedagogy class, and they had a completely different approach to the basics of music theory than the one that I studied in my undergraduate. So I was intrigued, and I kind of wanted to see what else there was to offer. So the text that I wrote is heavily based on these methods. And I basically read them cover to cover, both of them, and just kind of took notes. What kind of topics do I want to cover? What things are of particular importance to people who play melody instruments? So I didn't spend a lot of time, of course, looking at part writing issues, but a lot of voice leading really is what happens in the melodic line. So figuring out how to parse out what I needed and take out what I didn't was a challenge. And then from there, I sort of came up with my list of topics, and this looks a lot like the table of contents in any theory book. But these were the things I wanted to make sure that I covered. I had to draw a line somewhere. The last thing I covered as far as like chromatic harmony is augmented sixth chords. I could go further, but again, I had to draw a line. So that's where I drew the line. So from there, I had to analyze a lot of excerpts and a lot of etudes and a lot of solo rep. And I meant to bring my binders full of music to show you. This is the stack of music that I analyzed, but I forgot. But I mean, I just went through all of the Barrett melodies and grand etudes and articulation exercises. I went through all of our standard orchestral excerpts and I don't know, 15 solo rep, the important pillars of our repertoire. And I just went through and analyzed everything. And as I did that, I kept this spreadsheet, which you can't read, but here it is. So the gray subtitles here, this column, this was diatonic harmony in each of my chapters. And on the green columns here, I have all the subtopics I wanted to make sure I covered. And then this is the pieces and the measure numbers and page numbers and whatever, so I could go back and find it, and then notes about what specifically is happening in each excerpt. The big challenge at this stage, well, first of all, it was really daunting. I thought once I started, I would never finish, because I like theory, and it's important to me, but I'm not fast. And I got faster, but it took a lot of time. The other thing that was a big challenge that I didn't think about, and now I have greater respect for anyone who writes a theory text, is that you have to come up with examples at the beginning that aren't full of things that your students won't understand yet. So finding examples of just 1 and 5 and 1, or even just 1 and 2 and 5 and 1 without a cadential 6/4 or something like that. That was a big challenge. So this was my spreadsheet, and this is kind of what I had to build to get started. So from there, I had to sort of decide how each of my chapters would be formulated. What kinds of things do I want the student to do? Because I'm intending for this to be like a method book that's going to go on their music stand in the practice room or in a lesson setting. So what are the kinds of things, what are the kinds of exercises that I would want the student to go through to be able to approach these excerpts and have some understanding of how the theory works? So I came up with sort of 3 modes of teaching. The first was just a concept summary, and then an immediate application with arpeggiation exercises. The second was the repertoire analysis, where I dig into examples that go into the concepts that I explained. And then the final part was an improvisation and composition section, so that the student can sort of explore the harmonies that they learned about on their own and sort of get ownership over them. So I'm going to kind of go into depth with each of those 3 categories. So the first is the concept summary. It was hard to figure out exactly who I was talking to at this point because everybody's got a different theory background, but I decided to go for something that would work if someone had studied theory and just needed a quick review of the basic concepts, or someone who was ready to start. So they were into the music and ready to dig in and do the work to understand the concepts. So someone who's getting ready to take music theory or is taking music theory right now or has taken it and just wants to approach their music from a different angle. And at this point, the main focus of this section is to associate the theoretical ideas of the chord that we study with the physical and aural experience of actually playing through the harmonic progressions. So that was something that was really important to me. I know when I'm in theory class, often the closest you get to that is when you sing these arpeggiations, and I found that to be really valuable. And I think adding on top of that, just doing it on your instrument, feeling what it feels like to finger through these arpeggios and all the different keys is just incredibly valuable. And then hearing those harmony on your own instrument in the timbre that you recognize, I think is also very valuable. Because you recognize, what I could do with this harmony, with these colors. And that kind of opens up a whole new world of exploring music. So I've got a couple examples of arpeggiations that I used in various chapters. So this is one of the very first ones, a really simple arpeggiation of the tonic, and then a descent through the arpeggiation of the 5/7 chord, and then resting on the tonic. And this is so simple, but I think we study arpeggios, and we even study maybe 7th chord arpeggios, but putting them together, now when you have a tonic and a dominant and returning to a tonic, now you have a key, you have tonicized in something that is meaningful. So this has become important to me anytime a student comes to me and plays a piece in any key, right? So you've learned this piece, okay, where's the dominant chord? Can you play the dominant chord? Can you play the tonic chord? Can you find them in your music? And that's not hard. I mean, my 12-year-old students can do that. And I think incorporating that, just anytime you approach a piece of music, making sure that you've established the key by, being familiar with those 2 chords is really valuable. The next one is an arpeggiation through a more lengthy progression. And this one is just an example of using a flat 6 chord here instead of the minor 6 chord that would be native to this key. And again, I think it's a fun arpeggio to play, because when you get to the flat 6 moment, the colors really stand out to you, and you can really just dig into the colors and enjoy the colors and get to know what they feel like, what they sound like, and then they're yours. And then this second example, this technique I found very valuable for chromatic chords that I studied towards sort of in the second half of the text. And that is sort of comparing 2 progressions side by side. And in our first one here, we have a tonic going to a 2/6, to a 5, to a 1. So just a standard tonic, predominant, dominant, tonic progression. And then in the second version, I've altered the 2/6 to a Neapolitan 6. So you can hear side by side how those 2 chords are related, what the Neapolitan 6 adds that the 2/6 doesn't have. And again, once you play it and you feel it and you hear it, then it's something that is yours that you can use. So the next section of each chapter was repertoire analysis. And I had a couple goals in this section. The main one is just to learn to recognize musical patterns. And on the surface, that begins with being able to recognize the Roman numerals in a piece of music. But that ends up being actually just a superficial part of it. In order to actually do that, you have to be able to recognize where are the chord tones and where are the non-chord tones, where are the cadences, where do the phrases begin and end. And especially important to me now is this deeper level of analysis. So being able to look at a phrase and say, yeah, we go from this chord to this chord to this chord to this chord, that gets old pretty fast. Being able to step back and say, here's the whole phrase, and for this portion of the phrase, we're just expanding the tonic. So what does that mean to how we play? And this is the moment, we've heard predominant chords in isolation before, but this is the moment where we're reaching a cadence. So this predominant chord has more importance than previously, and so on and so forth. So being able to look at the bigger picture of the phrase and see what each part of the phrase is doing. And then the next step, once you've done that, once you've sort of dug deep into what is there in the piece to see, taking it to the next step. So can you use that information and make choices and make decisions? And this is where the power of music theory really comes in. Once you know what is happening, then you have the power to make informed decisions about how you're going to play the piece. And that's when that magical transformation that I was chasing, that's when that happens. And then the result of studying these pieces is always just an increase of appreciation for each composition. Once you've done enough of these analyses, you start to see the character of each of the composers and the things that they do that are unique, and the way that they solve, problems or goals that they have, really, really creative and inspiring. So I want to look at 3 analyses. The first one is from the end of the second movement of the Strauss Concerto. So to give some context, this movement sort of has 2 big statements of essentially the same phrase, with some some modifications, and this is the very end of that the second statement before we move on to the third movement. The way a Strauss phrase works, at least in this piece, we have tonic expansion, which lasts forever, and it goes really, really exotic places. It starts off with very basic tropes, maybe moving from 1s to 4s and 1s or something like that, but pretty soon you're in flat 3, and then you're in flat 6, and then maybe you move to the octatonic scale collection. But eventually he brings you back, and you start to see very traditional cadential tropes return at the end of the phrase. And that's where we are here. So even the king of like decadent chromaticism that he is, we've got a 1 chord, and then we've got a 4 chord, and a 4 chord, and a 5, and a 1. So this right here, just the first 2 lines, we have a very standard progression moving from tonic to predominant to dominant, and then to tonic. But this moment where the tonic appears is a little bit unsatisfying for a few reasons. It comes on a weak beat. The actual tonic note, the B flat, doesn't appear till the last triplet of the last beat, and it very quickly moves on. So this, although we've got a standard progression going on here, this progression isn't taking us anywhere in the long term. Sort of start where we ended, we end where we started. We haven't really moved on yet. So we start again. Now we're in the predominant area again. This time our 4 chord moves on to a 2/7 chord, so we've got a bit of an increased intensity that comes with the 7th chord and with this 2 chord. Then we have a 5/6/4 to a 5/7 to a 1. And so this moment, again, we have to kind of think in the context of everything that's happened before. When we hear these very tame harmonies start to come in, our ears automatically think, we're coming to something I understand, we're coming home. And it's a very exciting moment, but all of the ways that I've just described that he makes us wait, right? We hear a predominant and a dominant, but no, not yet. And then we hear a predominant, and then a more intense predominant, and then we hear this cadential suspension, and then finally the 5/7, and then finally the 1. So that in of itself kind of achieves this goal that Strauss has of creating these huge long phrases and making you wait for the final resolution at the end. But he's actually got other things going on in here that are really interesting that I want to point out. So if you look at the first beat of every measure, for the first 4 bars, he's actually outlining the 2/7 chord that we'll hear later. So we've got the B flat, and the G, and the E flat, and the C, and then here they are again. So he has this little moment where we're just doing a tonic expansion, but he's sort of foreshadowing this 2/7 chord that's coming later. So we've got these relationships between phrases. Another really interesting thing that happens here is the way he uses B flat, which, right, this is our arrival of the B flat, but it's used very prominently all the way through this final cadential motion. So the B flat's here as the 5th of our 4 chord, and then it's the 7th of our 2/7 chord. It's here in our tonic cadential 6/4 suspension, and then we finally hear it again. So again, he's telling us it's coming, the B flat is coming, but it's not here yet. So all of these relationships are all kind of serving this goal of creating a huge, long phrase that doesn't come to an end until it comes to an end. So this is powerful when you know this kind of stuff, because you now know kind of the goals that you need to achieve when you're performing. So you can't let the articulation get in the way of that, right? The articulation can't land anywhere until we get to the end. The vibrato has to be always forward. Nothing can stick out, right? Everything that you do, all of the support, all the vibrato, the tone, everything needs to be leading toward this moment here, which is a huge challenge, but worth it. So that's our first one. Here's another one. So this is Farrelling Etude number 2. And I actually look at this twice over the course of the text that I wrote. The first time I use it is in the chapter about 1 and 5 and 1, because this is a really great example of just using those 2 chords as we see here in the first 2 lines. And this was especially helpful because that meant that in this chapter, right at the very beginning, I could immediately address chord tones and non-chord tones. So when you look at the first few lines, if you take out the things that don't belong to the chord, we've actually just got a C major arpeggio going up and then coming back down, and then we've got this arpeggiation of the 5/7 chord, and then we move to, again, more arpeggiations of the tonic chord. So I want to zoom in now for a moment to just the first 3 notes. So if we know that the C belongs to the chord, the B does not, and then the C does. So we have 3 notes here with 3 different sort of relationships to the harmony. So this is powerful information because at least how I would approach this is I would want to give the opening C some strength, and then I would want to lean into the non-chord tone because it's dissonant and it's interesting, and then I would want to resolve away from the C. And unless you know which notes belong, you can't kind of make those sort of decisions. And this is great because now you don't have 3 notes, now you have a gesture. And a gesture is much more useful, especially when you're learning a piece like this. Students want to like saw through every single note, right? And now we know there are some notes that are important and there are some notes that you need to bring out, but there's a lot that you just need to let go of. So if we zoom out now, more than just the first 3 notes, now let's look at the first 2 lines. Maybe we can use that gesture. We see that gesture over and over again as we've got these lower neighbors. We can lean into the dissonances and resolve them when they come away. And maybe we can bring out tonic harmony at first, when we, very first play our opening beat, and then maybe we play that gesture a little bit less and a little bit less every time we come across it. And then the next most important moment after establishing that tonic and getting out of the way would be this moment across the bar when we go from a C to a B. So that B is our first new note of a new chord. So being able to identify when the harmony changes gives us a lot of power. So I used this excerpt later when we talk about applied chords. There are a couple really interesting moments here with lots of stuff to talk about. So the first one is this moment here, where we have sort of a sequence of applied chords. We have a 7 diminished 7 of 6 going to 6, and then a 5, 7 of 5 going to 5. This is interesting for 2 reasons to me. The first is that up until now, we've had 1 chord across 2 measures, and then suddenly we have quadrupled our harmonic meter. Now we've got a chord on the half bar. So we were establishing the chord and getting out of the way. Now we have a lot to establish very quickly. So suddenly our articulation maybe and our phrasing can be a little bit more aggressive to show off the fact that the harmony is changing. And if we also know that we've got these applied chords, this is a dissonant chord that resolves to this one. So now we've got a relationship between the first 2 beats and the second 2 beats. So we can establish that dissonance. This G sharp here is literally resolving to that A there and kind of showing that relationship. And then same thing with the 5, 7 of 5. That is a dissonant chord that has all this potential and wants to resolve to the 5. So you can treat those 2 beats differently than the second 2 beats. And then the last moment that is interesting to me is this moment right here. We've got another applied chord, a 5, 7 of 4. So if we're not looking at the music theory and just looking at the notes, we'll see 2 B flats and 2 D sharps. And we might be tempted to treat them similarly because they are both notes that don't belong to the key of C. And they are both very colorful notes. But the B flat here belongs to the chord. So the B flat is the 7th of our 5, 7 of 4. So our arpeggio here is C, E, G, B flat. So this is actually part of the chord. The dissonant note is the A. Whereas when we get to the second beat here, now our D sharp is a lot like our opening figure, where we've got the chord tone leaning into the dissonance and then resolving out of it. So being able to recognize that just because something is a chromatic note doesn't mean that you know everything about it. So there are some notes that are going to still be part of the chord, and you have to treat them like they're part of the chord. Other notes that are in fact dissonance. And you have to do the theory to be able to know the difference. So the last excerpt I want to look at is this moment between the A section and the B section of Symphony No. 4 by Tchaikovsky, Movement 3. So to set up the scene, the strings have been playing pizzicato in the key of F. And I've just cut off the top so you can see this better, but you can see the bottom line there. We've got this tonic pedal, we've got an F being held kind of all the way across. And if you're humming along while you're listening to it, you can just hear the F. So when the oboe comes in, all alone, the oboe is playing an A, and our ears have established the key of F, so hear that A as the third of the chord, the third of the tonic in F major. And then, in the second measure of this section, the strings come in and fill out the chord, and suddenly what we hear sounds like a 5/7 chord in the key of B flat. So we have an F, an A, and a C, and a D sharp, or an E flat. But of course we know that a 5/7 chord could be reinterpreted as a German augmented sixth chord. So we expect it to go from a 5/7 in D flat to a B flat, and actually it resolves like a German augmented sixth chord. So the F that we heard, that was the tonic pedal before, becomes now, it moves down, resolves down to our new scale degree 5. And it isn't until this moment that we realize that we're in the key of A major. And all that happens while the oboe doesn't change notes. So the A has to do a lot of work. The A has to play the third, and then the A has to play this nebulous, maybe I'm a 5/7, maybe I'm a German 6/5, I don't know, I think I'm a 5/7, and then change again when finally that's established, and here the dominant 6/4 come in on the fourth downbeat of the section. So again, if you just play the A, I mean this is a scary moment anyway, but if you just play the A, then you're just playing a really scared A. But if you know, I'm just the third, I know where I belong, and then when I get to the second beat, I'm going to change, and I'm going to be this nebulous thing that doesn't know what it is, and then when I get to the fourth beat, I've established what I am, and I know where I am, and I'm going to play it like I know what I am. So that's the last one that I want to talk about. So that was our second section. This is our repertoire analysis. So the third section in each chapter that I go through is an improvisation and composition section. And my goals here, this is the section students don't like. They don't like to make stuff up. They don't like to play around. They just want to do what they're told to do, and yeah. So this is to kind of break them of that. And it takes a lot of practice, and it takes giving them something really easy to do, but they will eventually do it. So it's to encourage creativity and playfulness and freedom and confidence, which those are all things that we want to foster in our students anyway, even if they are just playing stuff we told them to play. And then this also provides like a mode for them to explore these musical relationships. So they've studied them, they've seen them in action, they've played through examples, and now they are going to make up their own things using those tools. And that's really the goal. I want them to feel like these chords are tools for them, that it's not music theory for a grade, it's a tool. It's for them to use. So I have two examples of potential assignments. So this one is kind of silly, but it's easier, I think, for students to change something that they already know and just slightly tweak it than to write something completely new. So I've written out an excerpt that they maybe know with the chord progressions underneath. And then I pose the question, what if Bach wrote an extra measure here with this harmony and sort of fakes out the cadence and then completes the real cadence afterward? What would that look like? And they only have to experiment with 2 bars, or 1 bar, 2 chords, and I think that it's a very manageable thing, but I think it brings out some really interesting creative questions, because once they see that I just had to make some choices and I came up with a melody, that kind of brings up a lot of things, like about, well, composers are just making choices with these tools, and I can make choices. So some of them that I gave are more involved, so this would not be a first assignment that I would give somebody, but maybe it would be an assignment that I would give someone who's been doing this for a little while. And I also wouldn't say just do it on the spot. I would say go home for a week and just come up with something. So this is just an open-ended chord progression, and then this is the one that I wrote as a sample that they can play through and see how it feels, but then they can write their own. And they don't have to be brilliant, they just have to try something, and they'll learn stuff from just trying. So I think I've built, a series of tools and processes and methods that are really useful, and I think it will be published, hopefully, as something that will sit on a music stand and in private lessons and for players just in their practice room. And I found that it's very easy to actually incorporate into my teaching and playing style. It's really easy to suddenly start warming up in progressions instead of just arpeggios. And it's really easy to say to my students, what's the theory going on here? Once I've, put in the work. But there are limitations to what I have done. So first off, this only applies to a few centuries of Western art music. And it also only applies to this very specific audience that I outlined at the beginning. So this is, music students, late intermediate or advanced players. Anybody else could play it. This is sort of what it's aimed at. And then there are also limitations to using this medium of a physical book on a stand. It can be dry and cold. It's sometimes difficult to relate to your audience because you're not interacting with them and they're not interacting with you. So I've started to think, especially as I was finishing this up, as this work that I've done is sort of a jumping off point, a departure point for future projects. So I wanted to kind of share some of those ideas with you. I think it would be pretty natural next step to start looking at other kinds of music. So early music, or late romanticism, impressionism, post-tonal music, even non-Western music. Each of these, when you get to this age of music, it tends to be sort of a composer by composer basis. So this probably wouldn't be all one big book, but maybe just individual. I'm going to study this composer and the kinds of tools that they use, and kind of publish or write articles for IDRS or something like that kind of goes into this is how you can approach the theory of Vaughan Williams or something like that. And then I think it would be interesting to collaborate with other instrumentalists to create pedagogical tools for their instrument that uses their range on the instrument, the pieces that are important to them. And then I think there are some other future audiences and mediums, so I think I'd like to publish something that's like a method book for beginners. And there's a lot of things that I think a beginner method book could cover that they usually don't. Even just using scales and arpeggios and long tones and simple melodies, you could cover all of diatonic theory. You could cover chord tones and non-chord tones. You could talk about cadences. You could talk about phrases and second level of analysis. You could talk about sentence structure and period structure and binary form and ternary form. And I think that would be a really interesting way to approach teaching a beginner music. And it would really set them up to do well when they got to heavy-duty music theory as college students. I want to do this one just for myself. I want all of the arpeggios I've written in one place, because I want to just kind of work through them and be like, I'm going to just play around with 7 diminished 7 chords this week and use them to modulate and use them to, resolve them against the 1 chord and things like that. And just kind of, instead of working on just one key and the arpeggios that start on that note, thinking about more of, I'm going to play progressions in this key, and I'm going to use just a basic tonic, predominant, dominant tonic, and then I'm going to move on to more, colorful predominant chords, and then I'm going to modulate, and then I'm going to modulate twice, and then I'm going to modulate this way, and it's having that sort of be as part of my warm-up. And then I think one of the most effective ways probably to teach the analysis that I've done is probably a lot like what we just did today, where I'm talking about the piece with you in real time, and we're discovering things together that I can point out or maybe annotate on an iPad in real time, so that it's less, here's the analysis all at once, and you have to pick it apart and read the thing and go back and forth to figure it out. I think a set of videos would be a really great way to introduce these theory concepts to pieces that people are interested in learning and performing better. And then also, I think teacher workshops would be a really great thing to start doing, because I think teachers could very easily incorporate a lot of this stuff into the teaching that they already do, I think it would help their students. So that is the end of my presentation. So thank you.
So I think we'll move to questions.
Oh, so I should say that.
Yeah, sure.
I'll go first if there's anything. So thank you very much, Natasha. I mean, in a way, this document is like every theory professor's dream. Like, there's like a performer who gets it, and you know, I mean, I think a lot of the times what we do in class, pardon me, is just sort of assume that performers will understand how to apply theory to their instrument, and of course that's rarely the case. And so this is such a beautiful bridge between the academic side of music and the performance side. So, I mean, it's an incredibly well done document. But I guess this is more of a sort of a comment and a question. And one, in terms of future applications, I was surprised the first thing you said wasn't get it all online, because to me that seems like such an obvious, like if you had a website that was just essentially this document where each chapter is a different part of a clickable part of the website, and you go onto the subdominant chord, and it brings your little written explanation, a teaching video that explains the chord, and then, as you said, your repertoire analysis videos. I mean, to me that would be an incredible pedagogical resource. I mean, frankly, even for the theory classroom, like forget the oboe studio, like it'd just be very, very useful. I'm not the kind of person that has the chops to do that kind of thing, but
I'm not either, but I'm determined to learn.
yeah, I mean, I think.
I think you're right. I think an interactive thing that was, and again, like I think students don't want another book. I think they're online, so having it there where they are anyway.
Yeah, and just the ability for the student to pull up their phone and say, I'm going to watch this 5-minute video that explains the subdominant chord, and then I'm going to listen to this repertoire analysis. And it's even the kind of thing that I think a teacher could do in a lesson with a student. And so I just think that that's a really wonderful application that you can take advantage of. So the one question I had, I guess, and I commented this a little bit when we were going back and forth with the document, but you sort of scatter information about non-chord tones throughout the document. And you mentioned the Lates book and the Aldwell-Schachter book, which are terrific resources. The Aldwell-Schachter book actually devotes 2 full chapters just to non-chord tones. And I sort of, and actually, no, I was going to say, I feel like there's an oboe piece in one of those chapters, but I'm not sure. I'm kind of curious why you didn't go the route of having at least one chapter that explains non-chord tones and talks about it, because that forms a huge amount of your interpretive scaffolding.
And I did try to put a lot of it very early. Like I think a lot of the times when I talk about non-chord tones, like I introduced passing chords and passing tones and neighbor tones in the first chapter.
Yeah.
But you're right. I didn't specifically devote anything just to that. And part of it is because I think the challenge of if I don't teach the chord first, then I can't talk about I can't talk about this piece, and if I teach the tones first, I can't talk about the chords yet.
Yeah.
So sort of a bit of a chicken and an egg chase, and I guess I just didn't solve it into something confusing in the middle. But yeah.
Well, I mean, it would be, it's something to think about if you do decide to publish or whatever. I think maybe, even just after the tonic and dominant chapter.
Yeah.
And it's okay to say, here's a few non-chord tones, and in the next chapter we're going to
talk. Oh, that's a good idea. Yeah.
But I mean, I have to say, one of the things that you said in the beginning of this talk was that it was difficult to come up with examples that don't use things that the students haven't studied yet. And I want you to be aware that very few actual theory textbooks do that either. I mean, you've done something kind of monumental here. The Aldwell-Schachter book is good at that, and the Lates book is good at that, but those are pretty much the only 2. I'm saying that. Go to theory purgatory for something. But yeah, I mean, you chose as models books that do that very well, but most theory textbooks are full of annoying things like, well, you're not going to understand this until chapter 17. So that's commendable as well. But I think with the non-chord ones, you could probably put something in there.
Yeah.
But yeah, well done.
Thank you.
Well, I don't have much to ask. I want to say I've learned so much from reading through this document, and it's very inspiring, and certainly something that's going to be valuable for many, many Professors there, of course. But so this is what I really love is the passion that you have and the application in for example, the Tchaikovsky, on that one note. I mean, how do you translate anything if you don't understand the structure of the work itself? So those are things that we all encourage you to do more of these topics that you want to expand upon. It was great. I have not much to ask or no questions really. It just congratulations. Warm congratulations.
I have a couple of kind of, I think it's the same kind of subject that Dr. Adams was talking about, which is as you expand this or as it comes into its final shape, here are some ideas that might help with it. So I love that idea of a list of what kinds of non-chord tones there are. And I often teach it in terms of not all non-chord tones are created equally. Like some are very important and some are less.
Yeah.
So you may want to even have like, not just a glossary, but a like, as an example, this is on a beat and it's very dissonant and this is just a passing tone, but is it just a passing tone or is it in? So
Yeah.
there might be some way to do that that does kind of give a list. I tend, when I'm teaching the varied melodies, to start having the student list like, so what are, could you name all the different kinds of non-chord tones that we've covered in these so far? And have you found some are consistently more important than others? What would those be? Just as a way to help them keep doing it. So as this takes its ending shape, you may want to be thinking about that sense too of like, these are the basic ones, and sometimes they're on a beat, sometimes they aren't, sometimes they're this way, sometimes they're that way. I think that would be great.
Yeah.
Thank you for an example in 5/8. It made me so happy because we
I was like,
never
let's do
see that.
something
Right?
fun and weird. Yeah.
Yeah, we're so like, oh yes, thank you.
Yeah.
There are other meters.
There
I'm
are.
so happy. One of the things, and we discussed this a couple of weeks ago on the phone. If it is a book, you said several times in your talk today about I'd love it to be a book on a stand. I actually had that same thought of like, do students want a book right now? But if it is a book, there are some changes that we'll have to make to make it like friendlier, more readable, more accessible, more
Yep.
fun. When you were talking about often books are dry and cold.
Like this one.
Well, like everything, I mean,
Yeah.
it is, that's kind of just how it is. So
Yeah,
I love
right.
the idea of like videos, interactivity,
Yeah.
you as a teacher with a student doing this thing, where then it's much more approachable and human and
Mhm.
like what we actually do.
Right.
I think you have such a gift for that that I just wanted, it's very easy when we get to this point, you're finally done with this giant thing that you've worked on for so long and it's so good to just sort of put it down and like that's done. But I actually really do think either like a pamphlet that we could publish through Trevco or some like small book, we were talking about this the other day, like something that we could give to our incoming students to say like, this is a workbook maybe that links to your site, then I think something like that might be the way to go. Because if we do want students to actually be able to write out a composition on paper or have something written or some way to have them interact with it, but have a website with the teaching videos and the different like summary of ideas for each chapter would be great, and we would use it all the time, like all the time. I was thinking when you said the improv and composition exercises at the end of each chapter are the part that the students least like to do. I experience that all the time. Students are just terrified by like, I can't improvise, I don't know. Students except Alex. Alex is happy to do it. But almost everyone else does this like, what do you
Do
want me
what
to
now?
do? Yeah. So, do you talk about the character of different arpeggios or different keys?
So I had a student, this was last week actually, she was playing an etude and she described, like I told her to like write a story to explain what this etude is about, and she had this whole drawn out story with all this drama and all these But when she played it, it was not like that at all.
Right.
So her assignment for the next week was, okay, this is the tonic chord, and this is the dominant chord, and I just want you to play these chords slowly, or maybe quickly, but like in that character. So all you have to think about is, you know, the harmonies, and put the character together with the harmonies, and then once you can do that, then go back and play your etude. So that, I think that kind of like tying it together. All of these things, like I divided them out in the paper, but they all kind of happen at the same time in practice. But it's kind of hard to capture what that looks like, because it's sort of, what does the student need right now?
But in
Um,
terms of like the way that the book or whatever it ends up being is written, you may want to, in those improv and composition sections, talk about character
Okay,
or
yeah.
emotion
Mhm.
or story, again,
Yeah.
so that they're not abstract.
Yeah, okay.
I was just working on Marcello's second movement with a student this week, and you know, it's getting really labored with float up to the E flat and now
Yeah.
crescendo on the G.
Yeah.
And then I just said like, let's improvise major and then minor,
Oh.
and major and then minor, and just story, not this note, that note. And then it was really beautiful.
Yeah.
So there's
Perfect.
something about like, as we're doing this, when we talk about the dominant chord being a chord of tension
Mhm.
or a chord of non-resolution,
Mhm.
it's attaching an emotion or a character, or like what does that mean
Mhm.
in terms of the story, or this is major, this is minor, just as a jumping off point, this is diminished, what does that feel like?
Mhm.
Might be a way that a lot of
Yeah.
students will start to improvise. I can do an alphabet exercise, just like pick a letter of the alphabet, we're gonna come up with an adjective that starts with that, now we're just gonna play that.
Yeah.
And if you want to analyze along the way what key you're drawn to, or what notes you're drawn to, or what kind of tonality you're drawn to that helps you express that, what kind of tempo you're drawn to, what kind of a meter you're drawn to, fine, but first let's just play that character. That might be a way to make to help in the method book to make improv and composition less daunting.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
For the students who don't relate to it quickly,
Mhm.
as a way to just be painting a picture, just be telling a story, just play one note and make it this character.
Mhm.
How did you do that?
Yeah.
Would be a way to do it. I mean, I had a bunch of, first of all, I think it's so wonderful and exciting and great, and I can't even imagine the amount of time that it took to do that's really impressive to have examples that don't have that, like, that C sharp we're not gonna talk about.
Yeah.
Like, we're gonna cover
Yeah.
that's a borrowed chord, but we're not gonna do that yet. So that was huge, and thank you, it was really, really good. Yeah, aside from that, I'm just like excited about what would a Vaughan Williams thing look like.
I know, me too. I
Like-
can't wait to like do something else.
Yeah, like
next.
what would a WC application thing look like, where we
Yeah.
actually talk about like, well, this is